Hey, Juanita, great to see you again today. How are you?
Hi, Mark. I'm well. How are you? Hi, everyone.
Okay. My sound system's not working so well. I can hear you now, okay?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Beautiful, and I can hear you. Well, welcome everyone to Estate and Succession Mastery for Wednesday, our regular Wednesday 4 p.m. session. So thanks for joining us again today. We've got a great topic today. We've been talking a lot, obviously in regard to rural issues, but in regard to the whole estate and succession planning. And today we thought we'd cover off on a topic that we were discussing with a client yesterday in regard to just two absolutely unrelated business owners being in a business together, and that can happen in rural areas as well as in the towns, and just all the issues regarding buy-sell insurance, asset protection, funding, and all those sorts of things for people in business together. So do you want to, now, are you going to have to use your hands the way you did yesterday, or have you got a whiteboard or something?
I was doing lots of actions yesterday, wasn't I? I was like a puppeteer, but we'll see. Actually, I probably will have to. So it's been interesting because this topic's come up quite a bit in the last few weeks in particular with clients who are business partners. In the circumstance we were talking yesterday in a company, they're professionals and good friends, and it's been that way for a while, and everything's going well. So it was interesting talking about while everything's going well, what to address now to make sure things continue to go well, because it's always good to set up these structures now while everyone's communicating and talking. Oh. There we go, communicating.
We've done it. We've done it every session. But Juanita, if I can jump in there, I mean, in a lot of ways, I was laughing to myself as you were talking about this yesterday, but it's no different to a marriage. It's exactly the same thing. You've got two people in a relationship, a business relationship. They're all chatting, and I mean, that's the time you do the prenuptials or the whatever the other word is you call that these days. And it's the same in a business relationship. Everything's going along swimmingly, but you're planning for if the time comes when something goes wrong.
That's right. And we're also planning for things that might happen. It might not be bad. So, for example, if down the track, due to some personal circumstances, a business partner wants to exit the business, and the partners may still be on completely good terms. So it's not only to plan for things to go bad, it's also to plan for life's circumstances, I guess, down the track.
Or someone might want to retire, for example.
That's right, yeah. Or want to leave, win the lotto, leave and travel around the world or something like that. So
babies.
Could be. Yeah, that's right. So it doesn't need to be a bust up or anything bad. It's just a good idea to put these sort of agreements and communications and structures in place now so everyone knows where they stand going forward.
Yeah, good point. I've actually minimized myself and I've made you the focus of the screen. Whenever you can talk about,
I can do my puppet show.
You can do your puppet show again today.
Wonderful. Well, why don't I jump into the puppet show? So we spoke about we want to speak about two topics today in particular. And the first one is asset protection and structuring your business so that you maximize your asset protection. And this is where my puppeteering comes in. So sometimes what we'll see is a client or clients who have started a business. So they've started a company, or it might be a trust, and they're trading out of that company or trust. There I go. And using the same entity, the same company or trust, they start buying property where the business might operate from, or plant and equipment that the business might use. And all of these assets are in the same company. The risk or the issue there is that if in the course of business, the business is sued, for example, so there could be a workplace health and safety accident, there could be some director's liability for something. So if the business is sued and litigation ensues, then the assets that have been purchased in that entity, in that company, all of a sudden become exposed and can potentially be lost. The second thing is if the business gets into financial difficulty, and we've seen at the moment with COVID and the recession and all those sort of circumstances going on around the world, how these things can happen through no one's fault. So if the business gets into financial difficulty and experiences insolvency, then again, all those assets that are in that company or that trust, that entity, may be lost. So that is the danger.
That could apply to a partnership as well, couldn't it? It's not just about companies and trusts. Yep.
Absolutely. Yep. Companies, trusts, partnerships, correct. So what we and accountants alike prefer to see is a structure where this is where my puppet hands are going to come out, where we have the business operating out of this entity, but the assets being owned in this entity. And this entity might lease the assets, so lease the property, rent the property, or lease the plant and equipment. And what that means is if the business gets into difficulty, as I just said, and goes down, the assets are still sitting here safe in this entity. So by having them in two separate entities, it provides that asset protection.
But that applies certainly in rural businesses and so on as well, doesn't it? People,
yes.
In an ideal situation, you own the land in one entity and you own the trading company, the business in another entity in an ideal situation, because that's really useful from a succession planning point of view and so on too, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. So the ideal structure there with respect to that rural example is, as you said, to have the property and, of course, significant plant and equipment in some circumstances in a different entity to the entity that trades, and that is the business. Yep. So I suppose if you've started already and you only have that one entity and haven't put this structure in place right at the beginning, there's still ways to rectify the situation. And the easiest thing to do would be, with my little puppet hands, got to get it right here, yes.
Yeah, you're doing a great job.
Is just to transfer the assets over to a new company or entity. But there is an issue there, and that could trigger CGT, capital gains tax implications, or stamp duty implications. So usually that is an impediment due to the cost of doing that. So that is sort of a situation where you need to get advice from your accountant, where we would involve an accountant and see what those sort of effects are. Maybe another solution would be, if you intend to buy future assets, like future property or future plant and equipment or future stock, then you'd start buying them in a new entity. So set up a new entity and start using that one to buy the assets and slowly drain the other assets out of the trading entity. So there's different ways we can address this. But probably the top tips are, one, get the structure right at the very beginning. And then two, if you can identify that this is an issue for you and your business partner, then get some advice around the best way to deal with it going forward, so you minimise that risk that I spoke of.
And this is just as important for families as it is for people that are in separate families too. If you end up, whilst we can all have good intentions and suggest to parents never to put their kids in the same business together, give everyone something in. See, I can do it too. To give them something independent. There are times when children can end up, even when mum and dad are still around, can end up with a share, shares in the business or in the partnership or trust book, whatever. And sometimes you need to put rules around that too, don't you, in regard to behaviour, holidays, all those sorts of things, dispute resolution, how one can sell to the other, and first right of refusal, and all those sorts of things, which is moving on from what you're talking about, but part of the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk in a moment about shareholders agreements and the like. But certainly having that sort of structure in place that we spoke of can help with the succession planning. If there's multiple children and you might have a succession plan which involves different assets going to different people or different children, for example, that can assist. And it also not necessarily in a business ownership environment, but if you have one spouse that is in their own business, or a director, for example, and you have one spouse that isn't, then there's opportunities there to maximize your asset protection by putting the assets into the spouse's name that isn't in risky business. But always important to get appropriate advice around all of that, because with that, again, becomes certain CGT and duty implications. So there's lots to it, and it's just about getting the structure right, either right from the beginning, or if it's no longer at the beginning, getting the right, getting the options and choosing the best advice going forward.
Yeah, and communication.
Of course, we love a bit of communication. It goes with everything, doesn't it?
That's right. What would you like with that? I'll have some communication on the side. Absolutely. Okay, so one of the next things which we've preempted, Juanita, is agreements in regard to putting some rules around two parts, and one is a shareholders or unit holders, whatever agreement, or partners agreement, and the second part is having a buy-sell agreement, so that there's rules around what happens either when people die or when they want to sell out for whatever reason. So let's start with the shareholders agreement. I think, you know, we talked about this yesterday, but probably the ideal is to have these separate, isn't it? Have the shareholders agreement stand alone, because that's really about rules and how you conduct yourself and take holidays and pay yourselves or whatever. And the buy-sell agreement's something separate. So let's break them into two for today's purpose.
Sure. So we'll talk about the shareholders agreement, and I suppose even though a shareholders agreement is particular to a company, a Pty Ltd situation, don't tune out if you don't have a company, because the concepts are still applicable to whatever structure you have for your business. So you might have a trust, and so you need to deal with things in a trust deed, or you might have a partnership and you might have a partnership agreement. So the same concepts will apply, but today we're going to use the terminology shareholders agreement.
You're not using your hands, so.
Wow, you just like jump back into our screen there. A shareholders agreement is, as the name suggests, an agreement between the respective shareholders in the company. So it could be one, well, it wouldn't be one. If it could be two, or it could be three, it depends who the shareholders are. And I'll run through the type of things that we see in a shareholders agreement. So first of all, an example would be a clause about how the funding of the company will occur. So if additional funds need to be put in to the company, who will do that, in what proportions, etc. Will it be even split, etc., etc. And look, these are just all things that should be spoken about between the business partners as a starting point, just to make sure they're, everyone's clear on the same page. Administration and decision making. So are there certain really important decisions that you feel should be unanimous, and are there other decisions that don't need to be unanimous? So if there are certain decisions which may, apply to over a certain amount of money, for example, you might put in the shareholders agreement that the decision needs to be by unanimous resolution of the shareholders. A good point there, though, is what if there's two shareholders and you both disagree and you have a deadlock? Then you're never going to get anywhere. So there needs to be a mechanism in the agreement which sets out how you will deal with decisions in which you are deadlocked, because that can be a real killer for a business or for a company. What happens then? Sure. Another really important part of the shareholders agreement is what happens if someone wants to exit. So if you and I were shareholders in a company, Mark, and I decided I wanted to leave, then what is the process for that? So, for example, do I have to give you notice of that, and and how much notice? And do I have to give you the first right to buy my shares? Because for you may not want to be dealing with a random third party if I just trot off down to the corner shop and sell my shares. So we'll often see a first right of refusal, which means I have to offer you the shares first. And then if you don't want to buy them, then I can sell them to a third party. So it sets out that process that has to happen if one party wants to sell their shares. It also deals with how the shares are to be valued. So what is it worth? You know, what is the sale price? And to do that, there's different ways. And so another reason why it's a good idea to have that agreed upon early and documented, so you don't get into a fight about that later. So, for example, the shares could be valued by a valuer. They could be set by your accountant. It could just be what the market says at the moment. So there's a few different ways to do that, which should be set out in the agreement. I guess following on from that, also what we'd see in the agreement is how that all happens. Am I boring you, Mark?
No, I was just stopping the sun coming in on the face, that's all. Just pulling the shade over.
So when you come to an agreement, what will the process be? So, you know, who fills out the forms and lodges them with ASIC? What will be the payment terms, et cetera, et cetera. Another thing that needs to be considered is that what happens if I die or I'm in an accident and I can no longer work in the business? What happens to my shares then? How will they be dealt with, and how will you handle what's left behind? And that relates a little bit to the buy-sell agreement, which we're going to talk about shortly. Probably the final couple of more things that I'd say we'd address in a shareholders agreement would be restraint of trade. So if I leave and sell you my shares, Mark, is it okay if I open up around the corner? So, you know, that's something that should be set out right at the start, so we don't have that Barney once I sell you my shares.
Yeah, probably not what I'd want to happen.
No doubt. And then finally, if the shareholders have a dispute, so if there is an argument about something, how is that resolved? So what is the process to resolve that? Is there compulsory negotiation or mediation before a court process is begun? It sets out those sort of steps to be followed. So they're all examples of things that need to be addressed and really should be spoken about upfront between business partners, because it makes sure everyone's on the same page and it resolves problems before they happen, I guess.
Absolutely. I thought you were doing a Joe Biden there, reading notes off the teleprompter. And
I don't have a teleprompter. I've got my little shareholders tick box here, but I have no teleprompter.
Okay, well, this leads perfectly into the next area, which is buy-sell agreements, and then after that we'll talk about funding of buy-sell agreements in some of the forms, anyway. Yeah. So let's and you raised a good example there before, is that you know, I remember in my earlier days in my life in the life insurance business, you know, we used to talk to people and say, you know, how would you like to be in business with your partner's wife's next husband? Solicitor or other well-meaning friend, meaning, you know, two people who are in business together are normally good mates, or they you know, they have complementary skills, but they're usually mates that have decided to go into business together. And you know, chances are if one dies, the remaining person's in partnership effectively by default with the spouse of the person who was in business with. Now, that doesn't always work, and the spouse may then sometimes go along and get some advisor who's going to clash with the remaining owner and so on. So this is why it's so important to make sure if somebody dies in regard to the buy-sell agreement, and not just on death, but certainly in regard to death, that there's a very definite process for people to follow to allow whoever's left behind to maintain the business and not end up being forced to be in partnership with someone they really just don't want to be in partnership with.
That's exactly right. And the way that scenario, excuse me, the way that scenario may happen is that, again, if Mark and I are in business and I quite normally leave my estate, in my will, everything to my husband, then everything also includes my shares in the business. So if I die and my husband receives all of my estate, all of a sudden he's got the shares in the business that I had with Mark. And Mark
I haven't even met him yet.
He's lovely. However, I don't know if he would know much about the business we were in if we were in a business, and that's the problem. So, you know, people might not get on to start with and be able to do business together, and B, the surviving spouse might have absolutely no idea about the business that's been left behind, but all of a sudden they're a shareholder. So the way that we can deal with this is, as well as addressing that to some extent in the shareholders agreement, is a buy-sell agreement. And probably I'll just go the next step. We're trying to create the ability for the partner that wants to, the business partner that wants to continue to buy out the other partner. That's probably where we should point out the aim of this buy-sell agreement. So the way that it works is that Mark and I have the business. We take out an insurance policy on my life, or it could be on both life, but we're using me as an example. If I die, then the business can cash in that policy. So now Mark has control. Here I am in my puppeteer again.
That's why you've got the big screen going on.
Now Mark has access to cash, which has been created by that insurance policy. And instead of being in business partnership with my husband, he can now buy my husband out. So buy those shares that my husband's inherited. And that can work beautifully, because now Mark is he's the master of what goes forward, so he can control the business future. And my husband, who's got no interest in being in a business that he doesn't know about, can exit and take the proceeds, take the cash.
He's got the cash.
So everyone's happy. So so the way we do that usually is with the buy-sell agreement being connected to an insurance policy. It doesn't have to be. So if Mark's got a lot of, in that scenario, if Mark had a lot of money set to the side or separate to that he was able to buy my husband out, then that's okay too. But often that isn't the case, and therefore that's where the insurance policy comes in.
Yep.
As well as the circumstance that we just gave, if I die, the other circumstance might be if I'm in a bad accident. So if I no longer can work in the business, and there may not be the possibility for me to work in the future. So again, ideally, Mark may want to buy out my shares so I can get on with my life here without the burden of the business, and Mark can move on with the business and take that forward. So that's why insurance policies will also often entail a total and permanent insurance factor and a trauma factor. So TPD is a terminology that most people would know. So if something like that happens to me again, the business can cash in on that policy and use those proceeds to buy my shares and carry on.
Yeah. Well, we don't always have to kill you off or make you disabled. I can take it every now and again. Okay.
Okay. You're next up.
Okay. No, that's fine. So that's the case if there's a disability, there's a death, there's a trauma, in want of layman's terms these days, heart attack, cancer, stroke, those sorts of things, where using the insurance option for funding allows people then to have the cash so that they can decide, or they can, either one with put call options, one or the other can say, hey, look, great having you here, but you're not what you used to be. You've got the money, so I'll take the shares, you take the money, and then I can, if it happened to you, I can then go and look for a new partner who doesn't have the restrictions that you might have if you've been through a trauma or a total disability or something like that. But the bottom line is it's all about certainty, isn't it? And it can work either way. I mean, when two partners come together and do these sorts of things, they always think it's going to be the other guy that gets sick or dies. They never think it's going to happen to themselves. But it creates certainty for the families, it creates certainty for the person left behind. So it's just a really neat way, and it's just so important because, as you said, otherwise, if something happened to me, you could be in partnership with my lawyer or something like that. Tom, you might have to work with Tom for a while. But
I said nothing in case Tom is watching.
No, that's right. I should have come with a different example. But I mean, the whole thing is about creating certainty and confidence for those that are left behind, and it's such a simple thing to do. In fact, in my insurance days for many years, this is where I started. My bent towards succession planning and so on was helping business owners get this sort of succession planning sorted, so that there was always a certainty in regard to what was going to happen to the business, and a certainty in regard to making sure there was money there for the family. Because many times if you've got two people in business and if they're just scratching their way along with the business, and if one of them dies and the second one has to buy the business out, the bank may not lend them the money, and the family may have to wait 5-10 years before they get the real value of what the business was worth, which is in itself can be a real tragedy. So having agreements, having understanding, and knowing what's coming up for people is just so important.
Absolutely.
I tried not to interrupt you when you were talking before, because I know when you're on a roll, I just stand back.
Yeah, wish my husband knew that. No, just kidding. So I guess even though we've spoken about use that terminology of shareholding and shareholders agreements and shares, etc. I think the key takeaway is, if you are in a business, whether that be in a company or a trust or a partnership, you should ask yourself, have I got covered what will happen if I die, if I lose capacity due to an accident, or if I want to exit voluntarily? Is my structure and do my documents deal with all those scenarios? And if it doesn't, then you need to get some advice.
Yeah, and I mean the truth is, mostly these days they're put and call options, aren't they? We speak in the generic buy-sell agreements and share purchase agreements, but many times these days they can be put and call options where one person can either put, one person can call. So there's certainly enough mechanisms there to make sure that everyone is okay.
Yes.
So I think you've covered that very well. You've talked about the asset protection around setting up the structures and where the assets are held and so on, and separating the real estate from the trading company, trading business, and so on. We've talked about the shareholders agreements in regard to what are the rules of engagement, so to speak, in regard to how you run a business with a partner, and also the buy-sell agreement, which I'm a great believer that the shareholders and the buy-sell put-call options should be two separate documents, and so on. But whichever way you do it, just make sure you've got those things in place, and make sure there's lots of communication that goes with that. So
yeah, that's right. And I'd probably just add, just as we finish up, that I totally understand that for businesses that are setting up, and in the early stages the budget is tight, and these are the sort of expenses that probably don't take priority, but I can assure you from experience that I've seen when it unravels at the other end, it can cost 10 thousands of times more than it would cost to put this in place at the start. So if the budget allows, it is almost a necessity.
Yeah, which gets back to the whole estate and succession conversation, doesn't it? I mean, if you can solve all this and make sure the kids are all, the beneficiaries understand what's going on and there's harmony in the family, if you can do that before you go, it's cents in the dollar as to what it's going to cost you after the event, and the kids all start having a blue. Hey, I'm just going to take, if I may, Juanita, please just take a minute to talk about the workshop that's out at Goondiwindi next Wednesday. So unfortunately, I may be finished by 3, so I might be right by 4 o'clock to do this again next Wednesday. But next Wednesday at Goondiwindi is a succession planning workshop. They've got an accountant, a solicitor, some other people in the financial services areas and so on are coming along as guest speakers, and I'm forgetting that it's Rural Financial Resources or something are organising this, but it's a 10 o'clock till 3 o'clock next Wednesday at Goondiwindi, and just have a look on Facebook, have a look on my page if you want to, and there's some promotional material for that. So if you're out that way, certainly recommend you come along. It's I'm running a 2-hour session for free, just in regard to getting started with your estate and succession plan. So if you're kind of sitting on the fence and you're thinking about getting it started, there's no better price than free. So come along and take advantage of that session next Wednesday at Goondiwindi. So Juanita, once again, thank you. Lots of pearls of wisdom, and thanks for the graphic diagrams of how you should set up your business and how it should be held and so on. So Thanks again. And until next Wednesday at 4 o'clock, after I race out of my session at Goondiwindi, internet providing, I will we'll see you all again next Wednesday. Thanks, Vanita.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.